the night of July 29th in New York, but it's actually July 30th in Asia. And today is the International Day when we remember the whole issue of human trafficking. It's a World Day against trafficking in persons. And the theme is committed to the cause, working on the front line to end human trafficking. And all of you throughout Asia Pacific are working on the front line. So it's a day in some senses to honor the work that you have been doing. And Alexis and myself prepared this graphic which we're sharing in terms of honoring the work that you do and the rest. So having a happy day in terms of remembering all that you do in human trafficking, we're now going to launch the poll. And the poll has 3 questions. And the first question is around the article that you received in terms of reading. And the question in terms of that is, what is your opinion? Is sex work work? True or false? So you can start, if you have read the article, you won't have much trouble answering that. You don't have to think too hard. Is sex work work? True or false? The second question is, what legislative model has your country adopted with regard to prostitution? And I've listed out a number of models: decriminalization, legalization, abolitionism, neo-abolitionism, prohibitism, or legality depends on the local laws, or you don't know. So there's quite a range of options there, and it's more to get you thinking about different models that regulate prostitution in your country. The legislative model, the model that's part of the law in your country. So that's the second one. And the third question then is, what legislative model does the Good Shepherd position paper adopt with regard to prostitution? And so we're listing out 4 of them there. I'm not taking locally based laws: decriminalization, legalization, abolitionism, neo-abolitionism, prohibitionism, or you don't know. So take note of how you're answering that question. As we look at the surveys coming in, we can see very clearly false for the first question, but there are some people who think it's true. 14%, it's gone up to 21%, 23%. So, you know, we'll talk about that. And then with regard to the legislative models, it seems as if there's a range of responses. With prohibitionism, prostitution is illegal, 54%. And then the third one, what legislative model does the Good Shepherd position paper adopt? Again, there's a variety of answers there. And hopefully, as we go through the webinar, that you will come to see clearly the position in the position paper. So do you think we can end the poll now? Has everybody voted?
No, only 59 have voted, 62, maybe a little bit more.
Okay.
Okay, because people are filling in the responses.
Okay, okay.
Winifred, there's a few reactions that the sound is a bit low. Maybe you could speak a bit louder.
Okay. Does that sound better?
Yes, I hope so. Yeah. for those who are not able to hear well during Winifred's session, just switch off your video because that may help in using less data and enhancing the audio for your experience. I will stop the poll when we reach 100 because we have 91, 92. Oh, okay. Yes. We are at 43% poll. All right, I will stop the poll now and I will share the results. Can you see the results? Is it visible to you?
Can everybody see them?
Yes.
Yes. To me, is sex work work? 69% say false and 31% say true. With regard to the second question and the different legislative models, decriminalization, 12% say decriminalization, legalization, 8%, abolitionism, 5%, neo-abolitionism, 6%, prohibitionism, prostitution is illegal, 56%, legality varies with local issues, 3%, and don't know, 10%. And then with regard to the model adopted by the position paper, decriminalization, 31%, legalization, 7%, abolitionism, 13%, neo-abolitionism, 2%, prohibitionism, 25%, and don't know, 23%. So I think this is a very good poll. I do say take note of your numbers, of where you situated yourself, so that you're able then to see how is your attitude and your opinion changing with what I'm sharing with you. So I think that's okay now, Teresa.
Okay. I've stopped sharing.
Okay.
Winifred, is your system preference up on the screen?
Just a second. I was trying to see. My sound is up as high as it'll go.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Winifred. Yes.
I was. Sorry. Now, just let me get out of this. Okay. So the purpose of the webinar the first, we're going to, as we've said other nights, unpack the position paper. And I'm picking out number 6A in the position paper, which actually says what we're going to do. And that is, we're going to unmask the lie that prostitution is a profession or can be dignified as an acceptable form of work. So think about your answer in terms of the first poll question, true or false. We are going to unmask the lie that prostitution is a profession, is work, or can be dignified as an acceptable form of work. We're going to help you have a deeper understanding of systemic advocacy. Now, of all the position papers, this is the one issue that is really and truly a systemic issue. And we must do our advocacy work from that perspective. Paragraph 5 of the position paper says, we seek to be active in processes of social change. We engage in the international debate on the nature of prostitution, a policy of zero tolerance for buyers of sex. Again, you're getting some of the position of Good Shepherd throughout the world in terms of this particular position. And you are beginning to see that we do not accept that prostitution is work. Actually, we want zero tolerance of buyers of sex. 6C in the position paper says, we reject the legalization of prostitution. We call for laws that do not criminalize a prostituted person, but prosecute those who purchase sexual acts from other persons and those who sponsor commercialized sex. 6G says, contribute to policy formation by engaging in campaigns and conferences, articulating that position is a form, articulating that prostitution is a form of gender-based violence. So it's not work, it's a form of gender-based violence. And we support national laws that favor abolition policies. Now, there's a lot packed in there, but it's all in the position paper, and you will have the PowerPoint so that you can follow up on it yourself. And how they can be integrated into Good Shepherd programs. That's the third point in terms of the purpose of the webinar. So 6B says that we develop programs, provide holistic social support and empowerment, skills training and education about human rights. So it's a human rights issue. We have trauma awareness practices and we engage in economic empowerment. 6D says that we are educators within the community and communities. The dignity of girls and women, fostering the dignity of girls and women. We do analysis of traditional practices. And we started doing that the last day in terms of the girl child, including male sexual initiation in one's society. So how are boys taught about their sexuality? How are they initiated in terms of their sexuality? Sometimes here in New York, some women have told me that the fathers would bring their boys to a brothel when they're teenagers and say, go in there and learn everything you want to know. So we would be the educators, learning how boys are taught in terms of education and trying to bring about change. And again, we are critiques, practices of child early and forced marriage, looking at honor marriage and sexualized images in advertising. So it presupposes that we are familiar with all of these areas. And 6E is a newer one, and it's very much to the fore, particularly in this COVID-19 time, where information technology is being used in terms of exploiting children and adults. And there is online grooming techniques that ensnare people. And there's a lot of sharing of pornography. Again, I'm saying there's a lot there, but you can go back and look at it. And when we have the teasing out session in 2 weeks' time, maybe you will be identifying where you're doing these particular practices in the ministry. So moving ahead now into the webinar proper, we're going to be contrasting two positions throughout the presentation. And the first is from the position paper, saying prostitution is a form of gender violence that is structurally rooted in societies, an egregious form of discrimination, a terrible form of discrimination, a horrible form of discrimination. It's a form of gender-based violence. And we're going to contrast that, which is our position, with the article that I sent to you to read, which says why sex work is real work. So it's presenting the opposite to what we believe. The writer of this article, Dr. Lalang Mofong, is from South Africa. And she's a medical doctor. And she's also the special rapporteur in terms of health at the United Nations in Geneva. And she says, I do not believe it is right or just that people who exchange sexual services for money are criminalized, and I am not for what I do. So that's where she's coming from. If you read the article, she would be arguing that people have a right to engage. Now, in that point, we do not say that a woman who engages in prostitution should be criminalized. We don't believe that. We believe that she's engaging in a form of gender-based violence that is structurally rooted in society. So throughout, I'll be saying language matters. And my first question is there a difference in meaning between using the word prostitute and prostituted girl or woman? Is there a difference if you say, I work with prostitutes, or, oh, she's a prostitute, versus I work with prostituted girls and women?
Prostituted. Prostitution.
So language matters. When we talk about a girl or woman who is prostituted, we're talking about something that's done to her. If we talk about her as a prostitute, we're actually naming her in a derogatory way. Now, paragraph 4 of the position paper gives the Good Shepherd response to the experiences of prostituted girls and women. And notice it says prostituted girls and women. Our first response is to express solidarity with those who are vulnerable to being objects of prostitution. So when somebody buys a person, you become an object. So we seek to express solidarity with them. We seek to listen to their experiences, accompany them in their personal journeys, and develop with them holistic programs to meet their needs. And we support women and girls in healing, self-sufficiency through employable skills, economic and personal growth opportunities, and reconciliation with often estranged family members. If a family think that one of their girls is a prostitute, if I use that word, they don't want anything to do with her. But if we're able to explain that something happened to her, that she is a prostituted girl, then we're not blaming the girl or the woman. We're saying something happened to her. My next point here is, what is prostitution? Prostitution is a system. I said earlier, it's a systemic issue. It's a system. Sometimes it's referred to as the oldest profession in the world. But we Good Shepherds say, no, it's the oldest oppression in the world. So contrasting a profession and an oppression. Our friend, the Special Rapporteur, would be saying it's a profession. But Good Shepherd sisters are saying it's an oppression. So the question is, herein lies the debate that causes the difficulty. Is prostitution work or violence? Is prostitution a profession or oppression? And the Good Shepherd position paper is very clear in paragraph 2. It says prostitution is never part of a decent work agenda. Now, the term sex work, it's very prevalent today. And it's a term that is used for prostitution and indicating that prostitution is a profession, a job, that it enables one to have labor relations and health and safety standards. So the aspect of work and having work regulated and having health and safety standards, this is part of the thrust that is behind using the term sex work. The term sex work proposes to be non-discriminatory. If I say, oh, she's a prostitute, that's discriminating and stigmatizing. Whereas if we're moving to, oh, she's in sex work, well, are we saying this is a profession? For Good Shepherd sisters, no. Prostitution is never part of a decent work agenda. And we do not couch violence against women in language like sex work. The term sex work proposes to be non-discriminatory. But in fact, it normalizes violence against girls and women. The opening paragraph of the position paper states, the prostitution of women and girls is an ancient form of gender violence that is structurally embedded in societies. And I'm adding, it is a form of subjugation, controlling people, suppression, coercion, enslavement. That's what prostitution is. And the term sex work will never change that reality. Now, the term sex work has come about in more recent times, and we have sex worker organizations and we have sex workers unions. And it's the sex worker organizations and sex workers unions that are demanding to address the decent work deficit in the industry through a labor approach, a trade union approach, rather than through the measures of criminal law. So up until recently, a woman who was engaged in prostitution would be seen as a criminal. And one way of getting around that was these sex organizations and sex workers unions coming together and saying, let's work on this as labor, as a job. And the ILO, the International Labour Organization for Labour Rights Protection, has supported the idea, while not advocating for decent work for sex workers. So they have gone along and they have floated the idea of labour rights, but they haven't come out fully saying sex work is decent work. And this contrasts with the support that Amnesty International and other human rights organizations have offered to sex workers organizations demanding for decriminalization as a way to strengthen sex workers' bargaining power, reduce violence, and improve their incomes and health. And there's a link at the bottom of that slide if you want to read a little bit more on that. And the Amnesty International advocacy and decision around that only happened in recent times. And it's not just the ILO and Amnesty International, but many UN agencies have called for decriminalization. They include UNAIDS, the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, UNFPA, the World Health Organization, and until very recently, this month, July, UN Women were not coming clear on what their position is. In October 2013, UN Women sent out a note to everybody on sex work, sexual exploitation and trafficking. And in 2016, they launched a consultation. And Good Shepherd throughout the world were engaged in making responses. And I have put in here the response from Australia and from Thailand and from the Good Shepherd office. And you might like to look at those statements in the light of what you're hearing this evening and see, would you agree or disagree with the language? Excuse me. It was in 2015 that the amnesty resolution was passed. And this resolution obligated all states to respect, protect, and fulfill the human rights of sex workers. And I'm sure there are some sisters from Nepal, and Bimal sent me this in 2017, where the National Network of Sex Workers, the NNSW, their statement. And they were challenging, I'm sure the sisters in India know of Apne and The Last Girl First, and Ruchira Gupta. And there was a big conference in India in 2017, the Second World Conference Against Sexual Exploitation of Women and Girls. And it was in New Delhi. And it was organized by the Coalition for the Abolition of Prostitution International, CAP International. And the NNSW believes that it is absurd in a country like India to demand the abolition of prostitution, when the law of the land does not criminalize prostitution per se, And the Supreme Court has recognized the dignity of women who choose to remain in prostitution. So the NNSW demand that sex work, and I have put that in inverted commas, they're mine, be deemed decent work and safe working conditions in order to root out violence against sex workers. So there's a sense in which all of us are trying to root out violence against people who are prostituted. We, Good Shepherds, do not use the term sex work. We talk about prostitution or persons who have been prostituted. We all want the good of the person, but we're going about it in different ways. And I will show you this as we go on. The Good Shepherd position paper in paragraph 2, it says, we recognize that multiple harms of prostitution, and that this makes it an egregious form of discrimination. Our position on prostitution is rooted in the dignity of the human person. It echoes the UN 1949 Convention for the Suppression of the Traffic in Persons and of the Exploitation of the Prostitution of Others. And I want you to note that this convention in 1949 followed immediately on the Declaration of Human Rights. And it says that prostitution is incompatible with the dignity and worth of the human person, endangers the welfare of the individual, the family, and the community.
Nawala ka na, Inay. Hindi rin naman namin namamatay rin ako. Hindi ko na pinakikinggan. Ako nila.
Prostitution by its nature is exploitative and is never part of a decent work agenda. I've already said that earlier. The idea that women are commodities available to be consumed and exploited has no place in a society striving for gender equality. And I mentioned this already, from 2016 to 2020, we have never heard the results of the consultation that UN Women undertook. But on the 17th of July, on a Zoom call with women around the world, Pumzeli, who is from South Africa and is the Undersecretary General, Executive Director of UN Women, she actually stated, our core belief as UN Women is that all women involved in this industry are victims. All women involved in this industry, the sexual exploitation, commercial sexual exploitation is an industry. And she's saying are victims. And the ones who buy services are perpetrators of violence against women. So we're very happy to see her actually make this statement. She's in a difficult position because, as I have shown you, many of the other UN agencies take a different approach. But at least as the head of UN Women, she has acknowledged this, that women in prostitution, in this industry, in prostitution, are victims, and those who buy services are perpetrators. So going back again to the position paper, prostitution is rooted in economic systems structured within a globalized economy. That's why we're saying it's a commercial enterprise that has seen rapid growth of women in extreme poverty. So you have the whole economic system that exploits women. Political structures and systems that devalue and exclude women and do not evaluate gender outcomes of social policy give prostitution acceptance. And the root causes, every paper we do, we go to the root causes of prostitution are tied to poverty. Look at the list again: patriarchy, male privilege, extreme wealth, racist attitudes, militarization, ecological degradation, inadequate family support, and the demand by men for women to be available for sexual purpose. The demand by men, and it's demand that drives prostitution. And it's demand that drives human trafficking, because much of human trafficking is into prostitution. But if somebody is trafficked, that's a crime, that's clear. But if somebody is in prostitution, well, some people are inclined to say, she chose it. It's a good job. Isn't she lucky to have a job? Whereas we are saying it's gender-based violence. It's a systemic violence against women. Janice Remond, she is the author of many books and articles, but I'm quoting from her here because she takes the position of Good Shepherd Sisters. Women in prostitution, she says, need social services, educational opportunities, and economic alternatives. Real economic recognition that doesn't freeze them into a life of prostitution, but provides a different future. And that, of course, always has been the approach of Good Shepherd Sisters. Women in prostitution need income-generating projects that will provide them with decent livelihoods, the kind of jobs that do not lock them into lives of sexual and economic exploitation. And women in prostitution need to be brought into the economic mainstream, not to have prostitution mainstreamed as a legitimate work. So making prostitution legitimate work, that's not the way to go about it. The way to go about it is to give women training, education, skills, income generating opportunities so that they are able to make a decent living with decent work. I just, referring back here to the 1949 convention, I just wanted to note one thing, and that only 82 countries in this long 71 years of the convention, only 82 countries are parties to it. And that will tell you something of the conflict that is around about this very issue. Remember when we spoke about the Palermo Protocol, we were saying 170 countries plus, and when we talked about the CRC, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, every country in the world except the United States has ratified that, but here only 82 countries. Reference to the 1949 Convention is says prostitution is incompatible with the dignity and worth of the human person. And we have that quoted in paragraph 2 of the our position paper, and also in paragraph 6K. So it's referenced in our position. And of course, we have already mentioned Article 6 of CEDAW. Again, it talks about the exploitation of the prostitution of women. The system of prostitution is a violation of human rights and a fundamental obstacle to gender equality. International human rights law recognizes prostitution as such and prohibits its exploitation. For states to respect their obligations to eliminate the exploitation of prostitution, to respect human rights, they must implement neo-abolitionist policies. So now I'm giving you a hint with regard to what law the position paper holds. I mentioned to you about CAP, the Coalition for the Abolition of Prostitution International, of which Apne is a member with their organization, The Last Girl. They take a human rights approach and access to decent work, not in prostitution. Apne's The Last Girl, the first concept there is rooted in the fact that all over the world and throughout history, the most systemically disadvantaged groups have been overrepresented in sexual exploitation and prostitution. So if they're minority groups, depending on class, status, people who are considered less than, people who are poor, these are the people that we will find who have been sexually exploited. And CAP calls for the universal elimination of the exploitation of the prostitution of others. And that also is our position. And I'm contrasting CAP International, Apne, and saying we're not alone in this journey in terms of echoing and trying to change the systemic injustice and eliminate the prostitution of others, the exploitation of the prostitution of others. And they do that by using Article 6 of CEDAW and referring to the 1949 convention and also the Palermo Protocol, which we mentioned when we were looking at human trafficking. And this is exactly what's in our position paper. Ruchira says prostitution is a highly gendered and patriarchal system that disproportionately impacts the poorest women and young children. Most of her work is with children and young people rather than women in prostitution. Victims of incest and sexual violence, Indigenous women and children, low-caste communities, migrant women and children, and women and girls from ethnic minorities are still the primary victims of sexual exploitation by pimps, traffickers, and sex buyers. Again, all of the groups that are minority groups. And now I'm saying this was an opportunity in 2017 at the stakeholders meeting on the UN Global Plan to combat trafficking in persons to actually make a statement. So we have been on the global stage at the UN making the statement. You can hear the video if you click on the link. And again, I'm side by side with Ruchira when the General Assembly was opening in 2017. And again, we were engaging in the international debate. And again, I gave the Good Shepherd approach to member states. So we're engaging on the international scene. And before we take a break and go into the breakout rooms, I just want to share with you that there is a lot of emphasis today and in the last maybe 5 to 7 years on survivors and survivor networks. And it's women who have left prostitution and are now speaking out. They really are the people who will bring the change, but we need to support them and be with them. And one such network is Space International. It stands for Survivors of Prostitution Abuse Calling for Enlightenment. So the idea of enlightenment, to realize that this is gender-based violence. And the survivors will tell you very clearly that it's violence that they have suffered and trauma, day in, day out, night in, night out. Violence, abuse, and there is no aspect of it that is decent work. Again, the Survivors Network are pressing for recognition that prostitution is sexually exploitative human rights violation. They say that legal brothels provide a facade of acceptability, safety, and option on a woman's part. They're a facade, they're a sham. Even worse, it enshrines a man's right to buying a living, breathing human being. This is at the root cause of prostitution. Men's prerogative to think that they can buy a living, breathing human being. And our response as Good Shepherd is to express solidarity with those who are vulnerable to being the objects of prostitution. We're very clear about it there, the objects of prostitution. And a tweet in terms of Space International from Michael. Again, she's from South Africa, she's a survivor, and she says there's nothing empowering about being bought and sold in the prostitution system. It is humiliating, degrading, and exploitative of the woman. Now, she can say that and say it with conviction. It's her experience. And we need more and more women to speak up as she's speaking up. And the other organization that is very much on the same page as Good Shepherds is the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, CATW. There are 30 years in existence. So they were talking about this issue, not before Good Shepherd, after Good Shepherd, but before some of the other organizations that I've told you about. And they work to end trafficking and sexual exploitation of women and girls. And they advocate for strong laws and policies, raise public awareness, and support survivor leadership. So this is the new part of it, supporting survivor leadership. I don't know if we actually do that in any country throughout the world to support survivors of prostitution and help them in terms of leadership. Maybe we do. Melanie Thompson is a young woman here in New York that I know, a Black woman who was in prostitution and is now a survivor leader. And she says, and I want you to take note of this, the multi-billion-dollar sex trade is the end point of sex trafficking, with the vast majority of victims sold into prostitution. A lucrative, meaning very profitable, unflinching system of sexual exploitation and abuse. There's nothing in it that has any semblance to decent work. Without a vibrant sex trade, where the bodies of women and girls are consumed for the entertainment of men and the profit of exploiters, there would be no sex trafficking. Sex inequality Histories of childhood sexual abuse, displacement, dire economic circumstances, and lack of viable choices create vulnerabilities that can lead to trafficking and sexual exploitation. And certainly, I think we in our Good Shepherd ministries know all about that in terms of children who experience childhood sexual violence, who experience incest within the family, who experience sexual abuse outside the family as children. They are very vulnerable to being trafficked, and oftentimes they are in dire economic circumstances. They don't have choices, and then we have a group that come along and say, oh, she chose it, it's her choice. So I'm going to stop there, and we're going to go into the breakout rooms. It will be a short time, 10 minutes, and just talk about what you've heard. And if you have any question, surface that. You don't understand something, you're wondering what this means, you don't understand the difference between the system of prostitution and while some people say it's decent work, we are saying it's gender-based violence. So Teresa, if you can maybe put us in the breakout rooms, and if you watch for 10 minutes, that would be great.
Remoshini from Sri Lanka.
Yes.
I feel we Good Shepherd sisters, we talk a lot, but when it comes to the practical level, I think we have to move a little further. So some practical issues should be discussed in this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You say that, Sister Leela. Sister Leela wants to say something.
Okay.
Sister I was wondering now, is this, when we say women and girls in prostituted, victims of prostitution, can we not include also male? Because these days we found there are so many young boys and male people also getting into it, and they are forced into it and cheated into it and all that. So should we only restrict only to women and girls? When we talk, at least, because prostitution is problem, like it's a human problem, I feel.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. They're very practical and down to earth. Yes, increasingly boys, young boys are being trafficked and are being abused in the porn industry and are finding themselves raped and sexually abused. So yes, I think we have to pay attention there. But the other group that is also linking in with the sex workers unions is the group of LGBTQ people, transgender people. And they also feel that their rights are being discriminated against because they cannot engage or are treated violently in prostitution. Now, the big query and the big question, as I see it, is why should somebody who is questioning their sexuality or is transgender or gay or lesbian or questioning wherever they are on the continuum, why are they being condemned to engage in prostitution? Why aren't they being offered decent work? Why aren't they being encouraged to explore who they are and to be equipped with skills and given the opportunities to develop themselves in mainstream society rather than mainstreaming prostitution for them as a group? they are discriminated against. And I agree, boys are being discriminated against. And just going back there to Lucy in terms of Myanmar, yes, it involves a lot of work in terms of setting up programs that begin to conscientize the police and the judicial system and people generally around prostitution as gender-based violence. And we need programs for it. You need the help of people who understand the law, etc., etc. So yes, there are good programs around with regard to that. One such program I know here in New York is Sanctuary for Families. They do a lot of work in terms of people who are in prostitution or human trafficking, but they also have an outreach through the lawyers in terms of educating and sensitizing the police and the judicial services and other lawyers and prosecutors in terms of understanding the position that I'm presenting to you. So Rashini from Sri Lanka mentioned about we have to get more practical. I think let's hold that one, and maybe we can take it up in the next session when we're implementing in terms of the ministries. I'd like to go back for the time that we have left to just look at the particular laws and to situate everything that we have said, hopefully in the context of you being able to pick out what's important in terms of the country that you're in. So let me see about screen sharing again. So in this particular section, what I'm outlining for you are 5 models. And these were the models that were given to you in terms of question 2 and 3 in the poll. So you can see the model, and I have a color code there at the side to help us as we move through it. It can be confusing, but if you look at, take abolitionism, the first one, and selling sex is legal. So it's okay for the woman or the man, if it's the man that's selling sex, that's okay. And buying it is okay, according to abolitionism. But organizing sex in terms of brothels and clubs and all of that, that's illegal. And buyer solicitation is often illegal, going around soliciting for other people. The orange color is neo-abolitionism. Now, I'm using this term because I've taken this from Wikipedia, and for the position that we take, we usually use the term abolitionists, that we are abolitionists. But the difference between what they give here is the selling of sex is legal, but the buying is illegal. And that's where we would stand. The person who buys is the perpetrator. The person who buys is the exploiter. The person who buys is usually men, and that's illegal. Organizing brothels and other ways of organizing sex clubs, etc., that also is illegal. And buying and solicitation is illegal. So some of the reading, and as you read from the CATW and from the Coalition for the Abolition of Prostitution, CAP, and Apne, they will say they're abolitionists. And it's abolitionists in the neo-abolitionist definition here, that the selling of sex, we do not criminalize the woman, but we criminalize the buyer. Now, legalization, regulated, everything is regulated. So who can sell, where they can sell, who can buy, where it takes place, the whole thing about who helps you to find, etc. All that is regulated in the law. So then decriminalization is where everything is legal. To buy, to sell, to organize, to solicit, whatever, everything is legal. And prohibitionism is everything is illegal. Buying is illegal, selling is illegal, organizing is illegal, etc. So abolitionism, neo-abolitionism, I put the two there together, but we are recognizes prostitution as a system of oppression and puts measures in place for its education. Legalization and decriminalization, those two legal approaches, buying and selling are not a crime, but in legalization, everything is regulated. So you have red light zones. And in decriminalization, there's no law restricting buying or selling, except for regulating its activities as an industry. And prohibition then says it's all criminalized. And that's the system that operates in most of the world. I think I've said everything there. You can look at it yourself again. So my question now is, where do you and your country stand? And as I said, I took this from Wikipedia because it had the globe and it has the colors in. So you can see that light blue, decriminalization, Australia is, and New Zealand. Legalization is the green, again, some of it in Australia. Abolitionist is the dark blue. India here, prostitution is legal, but organized activities such as brothel and pimping are illegal. Prostitution is not regulated. Then the neo-abolitionism, which is linked with the abolitionism, you can see it's part of Europe. You can see there France, Ireland, and the Nordic countries, Norway and Sweden and Iceland. So it's up here, there's Iceland and Canada, where this law has been introduced. And it began in Sweden in 1999. And then it spread to Norway. First it was known as the Swedish model, then it became known as the Nordic model because Norway and Iceland joined in. And more recently, in the last few years, France, Ireland, Canada, and Israel is also, has adopted the Nordic model, which has again changed its name to the equality model. So you can hear Swedish, Nordic, or equality model. And then the red is prohibitionism, where prostitution is illegal. And you can see that over much of the world. And then legality varies with local customs. So you can see the darker areas here in Latin America. And also here, what's that? Indonesia and Borneo around here. So that's, you'll be able to see where you are here. I have put out the countries. So you can see most of them are in the red, which says it's illegal. You have Taiwan in green, and you have bits of Australia. Some of Australia is let me not confuse you now, decriminalized. So that it's decriminalized. And then India and Malaysia and Singapore are here in the blue, legalized. So you have the opportunity there to see where your country stands. Some of this I've said in terms of the Nordic model, Sweden Nordic model, now called the equality model, and where it's implemented. The Netherlands, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland have legalization. New Zealand and parts of Australia decriminalized. Everything in the sex trade is legal. You also have that in the Netherlands and Germany. And then Russia, I just picked that out. It became illegal on the forming of the Soviet Union. But after the Soviet Union, prostitution has seen significant growth. So that's just to give you some context of the global scene. I picked this out of a South African paper because in South Africa they're trying to implement the equality model, and it was actually the name became equality once the advocacy started in South Africa. So total criminalization of what the Commission calls adult prostitution. So they looked at these 4 systems: total criminalization, total decriminalization, legalization and regulation, and then decriminalization solely of prostituted individuals. So that's the position we want, the decriminalization of prostituted individuals and supporting them to exit the sex trade, while penalizing the buyers who fuel the multi-million-dollar sex trade and those profiting from the exploitation. So this is what we're about: decriminalize the woman or girl, the woman in prostitution, criminalize the buyer, and end any people who are benefiting or profiting from the sex trade, that they also would be penalized. And this is in our position paper in 6C and H. You find reference to the equality law. It says there decriminalization, the other term abolitionists. Now, I just want to highlight, it was in one of the TIP reports many years ago, talking about temple prostitution in India. So I'm just highlighting cultural practices, and also in Japan and Indonesia, there are cultural practices in terms of prostitution. Again, I'm saying language matters. And we Good Shepherds do not use the term sex work, rather prostituted girl or woman. We refer to commercial sexual exploitation or the sex trade. We use the term sex trade, but we generally say commercial sexual exploitation. We speak of trafficking into prostitution, into the sex trade, or into commercial sexual exploitation. We do speak of sex buyers, or in the position paper, it says those who purchase sexual acts. And the term sex work, I'm back to this again, is used to legitimize a system of oppression. And it supposes to remove stigma and discrimination. But when I was writing the statement for CSW 64 this year, which didn't take place, I referred to it as corporate capture. The industry, the corporate sector, rich men, they have captured and set up this system in terms of commercial sexual exploitation for their own benefits. So sometimes it's important that we distinguish between full or partial discrimination. So some people call for full discrimination. That's the people who promote commercial sexual exploitation, who support the sex trade. But we call for partial discrimination. Partial decriminalization. And that means that the woman who is prostituted, she is decriminalized. She is not made into a criminal. In actual fact, she is helped to exit prostitution and to have services offered to her. Most people who support full decriminalization are upper class and have a choice. But those who are targeted often don't have a choice, are poor and colored women who don't have a choice because of inequality, racial inequality, or class and gender disparities. We, Good Shepherds, do not support full decriminalization of any other industry or trade. We don't support, sorry now, that there is written wrong. We don't look for decriminalization in any other trade to say that they can do what they like. So why are we calling for full decriminalization of the sex trade? Why do we say it's okay? The debate then is often around rights. Whose rights? So using organizations to advocate for full decriminalization, we don't see men out there saying, it's my right to buy women. We don't get that men are standing up and saying, it's my right to buy women. But what we have is, we have sexually exploited persons saying, I have a right to exploit myself, to sell myself. And that's what the sex work is about. But it's done by people, and often the corporate sector, the open society, George Soros, people with money, give money to these women to promote sex work. And we are against that. I'm not going to delay there. I think we have more or less exhausted our time because we need to give a bit of time for other questions and maybe discussion. But before I stop, I do want to say that in paragraph 1, the second sentence in the position paper, it talks about socio-cultural perceptions and attitudes about relationships between men and women. And so that reinforce the system's strength. So you need to stop and think, what are the socio-cultural perceptions of prostitution in India, in Pakistan, in Myanmar, in Vietnam, wherever. We began, and I want to link this, to begin some exploration of social cultural perceptions when reviewing the girl child and asking what we think about the girl child and why is she in this situation, and why is it that we are protective of her. And I'm going to suggest that we are protective of the girl child because we don't want her falling into the system of prostitution, but we don't talk about it. So this is where I'm saying we need to examine our social cultural perceptions. Economic systems, political systems, these are mentioned in the position paper. And the root causes of prostitution are tied to poverty. If people had access to decent work, if people had access to employment, if people had access to education, they would not be engaging in prostitution. So it's tied to poverty, patriarchy, male privilege, extreme wealth, racist attitudes, militarization. Look at the situation in the Philippines and anywhere there has been American bases, militarization, ecological degradation, inadequate family support, lack of social protection, and the demand by men for women to be available for sexual purpose and purchase. So the whole issue of demand is very important, and this might be one of the areas where we begin to talk about the issue and educate ourselves on it. I'm skipping over a few slides there. You can look at them in your own time. The statement for CSW, we advocacy for full decriminalization of the sex industry is the corporate, patriarchal, criminal, and neo-capitalist capture of the gender equality agenda. So it's driven by money, by patriarchy. It's a criminal activity. We see all of that around human trafficking, and the particular system of economics that we have, they're calling it now neoliberal capitalism. Not just the old capitalism, but a new kind of capitalism. And it's this capitalism that promotes and wants women to be available for purchase. Our organization continues to counter the forces that seek to decriminalize the sex trade in the name of gender equality. It is not authentic to advocate for the elimination of all trafficking for sexual exploitation in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and at the same time condone the decriminalization of the sex industry and its legitimization as sex work and women's choice. There's a dichotomy there, and it's not authentic. So I think I'm going to stop there. There are some other slides that you can look at that fill out and again try to look at it from the same point of view, but maybe using slightly different language. So I'll end the slide share there. You'll have access to the full PowerPoint, and at the end, I have put in some references, both with regard to reading both sides, both in terms of abolitionists and what the Good Shepherd group, together with the CATW, the Coalition against the Coalition for the Abolition of Prostitution, and the survivors' networks in those groups. I've put in what they're saying, and I've also put in some of the other writing, like I did when I shared with you the article from the rapporteur on health, so that you see both perspectives. But Good Shepherd in the position paper are very clear about where we stand. It's an oppression, it's a violence against women, and we can never condone it. And we have to be careful about our use of language and by the word sex work is thrown around in all kinds of articles today as if it was okay, as if it's normal. But for us, it's not normal. It raises a red flag, and we try to counter that saying, no, 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 it's not decent work. It's violence against women. It's a systemic violence against women and girls. Of course, as you have already said, it's a violence also against boys and against the transgender, gay, lesbian groups that would also be pushed into that sector and be thinking that that's all that's there for them. But I believe that they also needed to be educated in terms of who they are, given the opportunity to express who they are, live with dignity in mainstream society, enter the workplace, dignified work, and contribute to society from their perspectives and their experience of their sexuality. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I could keep going on, you see, that would be the danger.
Thank you, Winifred. Thank you. And as we're gathering our thoughts together, I'd just like to summarize Winifred's very, very rich sharing today. We heard about language, and we heard about how language is actually a byproduct of how we frame our thinking, our beliefs, and our core values. And we heard that with the Good Shepherd position paper, the value around women in prostitution is that it is equated to gender-based violence. And we need to be very clear about that as we approach this topic on prostitution. We also heard about how demand for sex is the driver for prostitution, and how, you know, the position about trafficking is also part of this whole discourse. And very interestingly, if you had been following the comments in the chat group, in the chat box, you will see many people have resonated with the thinking about survivor leadership. How do we engage women who are survivors of prostitution into the topic and into the discourse as well? And we also heard about survivor networks. And I think most importantly, when we talk about the rights-based approach, it is to know which position our countries are in. Because it is when we know the positions of our own countries that we know a starting point and where to address the acupuncture points of prostitution of women. So with this, I encourage people with some questions, 1 or 2 reactions, to please say your name and to give us your reaction. Because there are 226 people here, yeah, if you say your name and give your reaction, then we will know who is speaking.
Hello, Grace.
Yes, Goretti.
It was really interesting to hear what Winifred and what your summary. But like in Indonesia, we have like illegal, no, everything like hidden. So I don't know how, if we really want to be like to have some for people who are victim or are in the prostituted people like them. Either I was thinking it is maybe the easy thing, maybe giving awareness for what is prostitution actually, or who are women who are prostituted. Maybe just this awareness, but I don't know how to work. If when hearing everything, I was really interested to know or to talk about those things, but don't know how to begin when everything is hidden.
Thank you, Goretti. Winifred, do you want to respond to each one, or you want to wait until we have a few?
Maybe we'll wait until we have a few,
Okay.
because it gives a better opportunity to hear other people. Yes.
Hello, Teresa.
Hello. Hello, Pakistan. Please go ahead.
Here, Sister Sophia is here from Pakistan.
Yes.
Same thing. First of all, I would like to thank for the so inspiring talk. And I felt I'm very grateful that I learned these new terms. These are very positive terms that give positive thoughts to our soul, beginning from us as a Good Shepherd sisters. And I feel it's very positive terms that give positive thoughts about the work that is more rejected in our country as well. And like earlier sister was telling, how can we approach when it is hidden and when the family says that if we stop this work, give us the some income resource, some other reasons, ways of earning money. So sometimes families involvement also is there. So how can we approach to these people?
Thank you, Sobia. Thank you. Can we have one more reaction and then?
May I?
Yes.
May I?
Yes, please go ahead.
Supaporn, Thailand. I am looking at the root cause of the prostitution, and when I think back of my experience working in Pattaya for more than 10 years with the women involved in prostitution, I don't see the cause that I saw. Most of the women that I talked to come into this prostitution, they have the background of being sexual exploitation. So this is just my comment when I look at the root cause of the prostitution. Yeah.
Thank you, Supaporn. They themselves have been. Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, first, I just want to say thank you to Winifred that the whole presentation was so enriching. And it is really interesting to know that 5 legislation models of the prostitutions. But I have one question, like some countries which have been studying for more than one legislation model, like if I'm not wrong, like the country like Australia. So how, I just want to know how the country is operating with more than one model of the legislation on prostitution, and is there any effect on the migration flow of the country? Then my second question is that how the trends of the prostitution is shifting in the post-COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you.
I have a question, Teresa.
Yes, please. Go ahead, Joan.
Just for Winnie, just now I saw the agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals. One of it is to end prostitution by 2030. Am I right? So, if what actions could we take, or as NGO, as a international NGO and NGOs to, because it says it's not an authentic an agenda for that to happen, especially when decriminalization of all sorts of prostitution is being made. So I'm just wondering, like, what could we do, as an NGO international? Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Winifred, maybe we could respond already.
Yes. Thanks for the questions. I think they're really insightful and demanding good answers. I'm not sure that I'll have the best of answers, but the idea of survivor leadership. Now, again, I think it's how can we support survivors to do it themselves. It's not that we take them under our umbrella, as it were, and that we're promoting survivors' leadership, but they themselves are doing it. So it's how to support them to do it themselves. So very practically, like it might be making a contribution in terms of money to a survivors group so that they're able to do their own work. That might be one way. Goretti mentioned, and maybe it came up someplace else, about the whole hidden nature of prostitution. And it's a taboo subject, if you like. It's not spoken about. So how do we surface it? And I think if we look at our programs, the position paper is very clear. We don't, in any sense, judge a woman. We don't judge or tell her, come out of it, or you can only come to us if you leave. We befriend the person and we accompany them in their journey. And I think there's something in the work of Pattaya, certainly when I was there, that was all about that accompaniment. Now, that's very different. And that's our approach in terms of the person. But that's very different to what we need when we come to advocacy. And that brings me to what Joan is bringing up there in terms of, like, as an international congregation. Well, now I know that Malaysia has been very good and through Global Shepherds in making responses. For example, when the general recommendation from CEDAW on Article 6 was out for consultation, Malaysia actually made a response. And the office made a response. I'm not sure that, I think it was only the two of us anyway, but we make a response from what I have given you in terms of this is gender-based violence, it's promoted by the corporate sector, it's a systemic issue, and it is not in any sense dignified work. We write that down and we try to get it in, no matter how we try to get it in, we try to get it in such that there is no way that anybody in Geneva reading it could think, well, they're not sure what they're doing. We're very clear along the lines of the position paper. I think the position paper, as it's outlined, gives us everything that we need. And I think I was trying to show you that in the first two slides around the purpose of the webinar and saying it's all in the paper. And we are unmasking the lie. Now, obviously, you can't just go from having this webinar to launching into a program. You have to stop and think and do a reflection and really come up with a curriculum for teaching according to what I have explained, addressing the issue of demand. But that's very clear in the Palermo Protocol that we address the issue of demand. And the interesting thing is it was about a year and a half or 2 years ago, a study was being done in Europe. And Gregoire, who is with the Coalition for the Abolition of Prostitution, was part of the group. And he was not able to get in fully into the document our position because men objected to they being targeted as being criminals for buying. Now, I found that very interesting. It's the first time I ever saw it come up in terms of men objecting. And this is what we're up against. So how do we get a package together? I have shared one of the documents at the end of the PowerPoint is from the Coalition for the Abolition of Prostitution, and they give a little summary of their approach. Now, you could take that document and use it as a discussion, but I think it would have to begin first with staff and then talk about how we're going to bring it into the community. And then also in terms of the women and girls that we're working with, when we do human rights work with them, are we talking about the issue of prostitution, and are we saying that that's a violation of their rights, and are we explaining that to them? Because as I say, if we don't, the position in terms of it's a woman's choice, she should be free, it's liberating, it's very hard for them to distinguish. And the last point, the issue around migration. Yes. Many girls and women migrating migrate into being engaged in commercial sexual exploitation. And somebody else brought up something that the migration. I had it there a second ago, but it's gone again. Yes, about Australia and different models. Now, there are different states in Australia, and its different states have different legislations. Here in the United States, we have the federal system, and Nevada is the only state where prostitution is legal. In all other states, it's illegal. And while a lot of work had been done here in New York by Sanctuary for Families and others in terms of human trafficking, and you see, it's clearer with the human trafficking. They've said that it's a crime, but in some senses, as I see it, the Palermo Protocol and the focus on human trafficking didn't actually push the issue of prostitution. And that's where we have the divide. We're all very clear, if somebody is trafficked, force, fraud, or coercion, they have been trafficked. It's a crime. But we know how difficult it is, even though a crime and the woman has been trafficked, how difficult it is for her to get to live in the country. She usually has to give evidence. She's under threat from the traffickers, etc., etc. All that is very difficult and hasn't been worked out in law. But the issue of prostitution was even a deeper issue, and as far as I'm concerned, it addressed one part of it, but it left a whole other part unaddressed. And what has happened in the back room is that the corporate sector, the whole thing of the sex industry, the commercial sexual exploitation has exploded. And it's happening all around. Even here in New York, where we say it's illegal, it's happening. And there's no comeback. But in a sense, what we need to be doing is ourselves, educating ourselves and joining forces with the groups that I in terms of joining with them and elaborating the position and talking up about it and being very clear that prostitution is an oppression, it's a violence against women, a violence against any person, because it robs the person of their dignity and of their personhood. If I have missed anything, Teresa, remind me, but I think I've, yes, somebody mentioned, maybe it was Jennifer, mentioned about oftentimes in her experience that you would find that the person had already been sexually exploited. And yes, that happens more times than we care to remember in terms of children being sexually exploited. And then they're vulnerable to being prostituted. Traffickers, people wanting to buy, they know who to target. And this is coming up more and more in terms of the internet and online grooming. which actually builds a fake relationship, and then it turns into exploitation. And then somebody is caught in the system of prostitution. It's very hard to get out of it. And then they usually go on drugs and alcohol, and makes the situation worse. There is a woman that I know here in America. Her name is Christina Stark, and she has written a book in terms of disassociation, which is the psychological condition whereby people deal with the issue of being prostituted day in, day out, raped, abused. They dissociate from the experience. She's very insightful. I can't think of the name of it now, but I can send the name to Teresa and she can share it. And she was writing, first of all, from her own experience of having been sexually exploited, and her experience in school as a result of that, and then later being prostituted, and then having the opportunity to come out of prostitution, and then reflecting back on what happened. The woman who wrote, I have paid for, it's in the PowerPoint, Rachel Moran, is a woman in Ireland, and she actually is the one of the founders of Space International. You'll often see her speaking in terms of survivors and survivors networks, etc. Very often the Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons, they almost always have a survivor on the panel. And there has been a push at the UN to have survivors speak at the United Nations. Now, I don't think as an organization that we Good Shepherds, that I'd be able to send out an email saying, look, send X, Y, or Z to me as survivors. I can have them speak at the United Nations. I don't think like that we have actually reached that level of being able to engage. But I do know of survivors here in the US who are available for educational sessions. Might be something you'd like to think about at some stage, to have a webinar with one or two of them, or maybe there's even survivors networks in Asia that you could draw on.
Thank you, Winifred. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Winifred. Thank you. I think we are already 2 hours into this session. It has been really very rich, very rich. We encourage you, if you have any reactions, to email directly to Winifred, or you can email to me and I will pass over to Winifred. And we will have another opportunity to look at this topic on the 17th of August. 17th of August, which is Monday, on the application of the Good Shepherd position paper on prostitution to our projects and programs. A lot has been happening in the chat box for this session, and we will look at the comments in the chat box, and we will see how we can make the next session an application session, an implementation session, and to think about that a little bit more. Yeah. I just want to, Winifred, do you have any last statements that you want to make before we close off?
No, I don't think so. I'm talked out now at this stage.
Thank you so much, Winifred. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to invite Sashi to share screen. Now, Sashi has been scribing in the background. She's been drawing as she hears, and she will share with us her drawing that captures, in essence, what Sashi has heard from Winifred. So, yeah, so just spend a moment to look at this, because this would be possibly another way that we could also do summaries of sessions at the AP Assembly in August. So, Sashi, would you like to bring us through, or?
Yes, I mean, it's a very premature attempt. At the same time, I'm happy to share that I have been given this opportunity to share what has been running in my mind and flowing through my hands. From the way we started at considering prostitution to be the oldest form of oppression, I really want to highlight that the language which we choose is so important. So decriminalizing these exploited, that is the prostituted, is so important. And our Good Shepherd position papers is the field of hope. And for these persons who are crying out that, no, this is not sex work, I need help, I need a decent livelihood, and so much more. So this is just providing the field of hope by way of our solidarity, and hoping that we can be a support to help these persons who are prostituted to become a survival leader in the future.
Thank you, Sashi. Thank you so much. We will make this scribe available in our email to everyone. Yes. Thank you, Sashi. And I'd just like to end by saying that all the position papers are interlinked. Yeah, we have gone through 3 position papers in the past: migration, trafficking, and the girl child. Today is on prostitution. Next month, we will do on economic justice, which is very much interlinked to economic mainstreaming of people who have been sexually exploited. And then we will do on ecology, the last paper. That would be in September itself. So with that, I would like to officially end this session, and also to thank Winifred for your great sharing. If you look in the chat box, Winifred, there are many people have expressed their gratitude and appreciation to the session today. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.